Welcome, I'm Father Mitch Pacco, and welcome to EWTN Live, where we bring you guests from all over the world. Our guest tonight is an internationally acclaimed poet and writer who says that to be a Catholic writer is to embrace one's spiritual, cultural, and personal identity. And we'll talk about how those things impact artistic creativity. Before we get to that subject, though, we would like to talk briefly with Peter Gagnon, the EWTN Vice President for Programming and Production, about a new program with a couple of the friars from EWTN. Peter,
Father,
what do you have for us this time?
well, we have a brand new mini-series. It's going to begin airing next week. So last year, we had the opportunity to go to Lourdes with Father Joseph and Father John Paul to tape a series of programs in Lourdes, similar to what we did in the past. We did a program in Fatima with the friars, and we did one as well in the Holy Land. And so this is the third one of those set of programs, and they went throughout Lourdes at different locations, and giving insight on the messages of Lourdes, on Bernadette, and really to bring a pilgrimage to our viewers. So obviously in the time we are in now with the pandemic and people can't travel, this is a great opportunity to experience Lourdes via the television set.
Sure.
So I think we have a little clip that we want to show the viewers about.
Let's take a look at it.
In a place where heaven meets earth amidst healing waters.
There are graces that flow from this place, every Hail Mary that we pray.
Lourdes, a place of pilgrimage, where the Immaculate Conception sets hearts aflame among the faithful.
That seems to be a crux of the apparitions and message of Our Lady of Lourdes is conversion.
Our Lady is wanting to draw all to her Son Jesus, that none would be lost. None would ever hear those terrible words, "Depart from me, you evildoers."
Father Joseph Mary Wolfe and Father John Paul Zeller invite you to experience Lourdes with the Franciscan Missionaries of the Eternal Word, a 5-part pilgrimage on the Global Catholic Network, EWTN.
All right, well.
Yeah, so people should tune in next week, beginning Monday through Friday at 5:30. It re-airs in the overnights as well.
Okay.
And just another note that on the 16th, Lourdes itself is having an initiative called Lourdes United in Prayer. And we're going to be carrying events throughout Lourdes that day, special masses, rosaries, and then a virtual pilgrimage as well. So in the 16th, it was a date of the last apparition of Bernadette. So that's why we're focusing on this week. So people should go to our website, EWTN.com, and also EWTN.com/friars. And there's additional content from the Lourdes pilgrimage that we shot that can only be seen online. So they should go there as well.
Okay. Well, that's what otherwise would have been on the editing room floor.
That's right.
We get to see it still. All right, Peter, thank you very much. And we'll be back in just a couple of minutes with tonight's guest, so please stay with us. Welcome back. Tonight's guest is on a mission. He wants to rally Catholics to reclaim the literary arts and all the other arts as well. He says that it's essential for other Catholics to hear their experience and worldview articulated from their own perspective. thus reflecting the lives of the country's largest religious group and enriching American literature as a whole. As a respected writer and former chairman for the National Endowment for the Arts, our guest is in a great position to encourage Catholic writers and artists to that end. So please welcome the former Poet Laureate for the state of California and the former chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts and the author of a very fine book called The Catholic Writer Today and Other Essays, Mr. Dana Gioia. Dana, welcome.
Good to be here.
Good to have you here with us. I was able to start reading your book. I didn't get to all of it, but I found that I really loved it and the perspective that you bring on the importance of Catholic literature. But you do that not merely as a critic, but you are also a practitioner who does literature yourself, poetry specifically.
Yeah, well, I wrote from my own life experience. I am a working class cradle Catholic, and as I've grown as an artist, it has been something that's also connected to my spiritual life. And it became obvious to me that I was living in a culture in which, even though the Catholics were the largest religious denomination in the United States, they were virtually invisible in the arts, except to be satirized, to be attacked, to be castigated. There were very few positive public Catholic writers, painters, composers, et cetera, et cetera. And it puzzled me because, first of all, I know many Catholic writers and artists, but most of them feel as if that they cannot talk about their faith in public without being criticized. Yeah. And so I felt that this was an issue that needed to be addressed. And indeed, once I published this essay called The Catholic Writer Today, I began hearing from people all over the world. Writers writing me, musicians, painters writing me. And they said that they felt cut off. They sometimes felt that they were the only Catholic, artist that they knew. And so what I've tried to do is to build a community of these artists, predominantly the writers, because that's my tribe, but also to put people in touch with each other because they feel invisible, they feel alienated.
Now, something that's very important to note is that the Catholic Church has been one of the major, probably the most major patron of arts for the last couple thousand years. And this is something that is missed. I mean, people still go to Europe to see the great cathedrals and museums filled with Catholic art. But, we don't sense that going on right now so much.
No, I think you stated it very, very correctly. It is impossible to think about the history of art without thinking about the Catholic Church.
Absolutely.
The Church has been the mother of the arts. And this was true until probably maybe 100, 150 years ago, though even in that interim period, there's been a lot of Catholic artists. But at the moment, I think people quite rightly don't associate the Catholic Church with new art, with good new art. Catholic art is something you order from a religious, decoration shop. Right. And this, to me, is a triple impoverishment. It impoverishes the church, it impoverishes artists, and it impoverishes the public.
Yeah. It's in particular at this time when we are going through hopefully a blip in our cultural experience by which public imagery is being attacked, oftentimes on racial basis. I mean, it's not just going after the Civil War folks, especially Confederates. It's also about destroying statues of abolitionists, people who worked against slavery and who died to free slaves. They get taken out. It's just this attack on the standard images of society as a whole. And we're saying here, no, we need to have more imagery.
Well, it's very simple. I think most Catholics misunderstand art. They feel it, they appreciate it, they experience it, but when they try to explain it, they misunderstand it. And it's because Catholics are trained in theology and philosophy and logic. I'm talking about Catholic intellectuals right now.
Yeah.
But the fact is, most people know and recognize the world through experiential knowledge, through images, through stories, through songs. And these things are how important truths are communicated. When we think of the Virgin Mary, when we think of the crucifixion, we overwhelmingly think of the rich interpretations and representations that our culture has given us. That allows us, in a sense, to physically, experientially, emotionally enter into the mysteries of the Church.
Right.
This is something that was a big battle in the Reformation, because Calvinists felt that somehow was wrong. But the Calvinists missed the fact that we know the world as complete human beings, not just with our mind, but with our senses, our memory, our emotion, our imagination, our intuition. And we Catholics do not think you need to separate the body from the soul. And so the power of art in the Catholic Church is that it is the most powerful and pervasive way of presenting the mysteries of our faith to communicants.
Right.
And when we no longer do this, we lose one of the most powerful ways in which God can speak to the world.
Yeah. I think one factor, because both of us are working class Catholics who ended up getting good educations, and which has been a blessing. And we come from the working class and the various tensions that exist with that. But one of the things that it speaks to me is the Catholic universities did not have many art programs of, maybe some art appreciation classes, etc., but art classes were not a high priority, because in trying to educate the other immigrants' grandchildren, usually it was sometimes the children, but usually the grandchildren of immigrants who were the first to go to college. I believe that's you yourself, and it's certainly my case. And in that, they focused at the universities on the professions. We had medical schools, dentistry schools, law schools, teaching schools, social work schools, schools to train professionals to help Catholics make it out into the wider society. But things like the arts and literature were not the strongest emphases, and that got lost, I think.
Yeah, and I also think the clergy was not there. I mean, the typical pastor was trying to pay the church mortgage, was trying to keep the school open, was trying to manage all of these things. And, they never thought of themselves in some ways as the curators, the purveyors of this Catholic tradition of music, sculpture, painting, literature. Now, you and I are old enough to have been raised in the Latin Church.
Yep.
And so And I'm from the kind of an ugly industrial working class part of Los Angeles, and was not an attractive place to live. There were almost no parks, no open land whatsoever, and the most beautiful building in my town was the Catholic Church,
Right.
Which was a huge, huge church. It was actually bigger than the Los Angeles Cathedral. They had to get a special permission for that. And I would walk into St. Joseph's Church in Hawthorne, California, and it was the most interesting architecture. And I would walk into a space that nobody had to tell me I could feel as a sacred space.
Yep.
That when I walked in there, it was clear that this was dedicated to something that the outer world was not dedicated to. There was this large, fresco, rather good one, of the risen Christ. There were stained glass windows. There were statues, and I would go there and we went to mass every day, and on every school day and on Sunday. So 6 days a week I was in this church doing the mass, and then there were other things like benedictions, and I was raised hearing the Tantum Ergo, the O Salvator Hostia, and these beautiful ceremonies which elevated me from my everyday world. And I think that's one of the things that developed the artistic sensibility in me, in the sense of this higher consciousness, this higher openness to the beauty of the world, because there was very little beauty elsewhere in my childhood. And I don't think that many kids today experience that in these kind of ugly, boxy, contemporary churches with poor music, with poor liturgy, sometimes no art at all, in these. And I think we've lost touch with one of the most fundamental things that the church understood, was that one of the ways that we understand the glory of God and the purpose of creation is through beauty.
Right.
Beauty is not decorative. Beauty is a fundamental way of knowing and understanding the world and our own place in it.
Mm-hmm. And I grew up in Chicago. They built a new church for our parish, and it was one of the early modern ones. It wasn't as ugly as some, but it wasn't as beautiful as the church where I'd been baptized, St. Helens, and a lot of the other Polish churches that my grandparents would take me to. When we went to some of those old Polish churches where, that were very lovingly imitating what they had left behind in Europe and bringing with them the artistic quality as best they could, there was the same experience, that there was a music that was very distinct from regular music and very beautiful. And not only the Latin hymns, there were also English hymns that had another quality to them, as well as music that the organist would play when we weren't singing. It was still a very beautiful kind of music, and the art, and the smell of something as beautiful as incense. All of that added in together to a whole picture of beauty that made going to church apart from anything else, and this was terrific.
Well, I'm a poet, but I work a lot with musicians. I've written the libretti for 4 operas. I've just worked with Sir James Macmillan on a big choral piece that's going to be used to rededicate the Christ Cathedral in California. But long before I'd ever heard a symphony orchestra, I'd ever heard any kind of classical concert, I would come into St. Joseph's and I would hear the organ. And the physical power of an organ is like a rock band. It creates a huge, huge sound. And it was the organ that brought me into the whole Western tradition of classical music, the Western tradition of sacred music. And it was, these things. Now, once again, there was no lesson where you said do A, B, C, D. This was all experiential knowledge that I was saturated in as a child.
Right.
So anyway, I do think there is a misunderstanding to a certain degree in the church, but broad scale in society about the importance of beauty, the nature of what beauty is. And when a society or a church walks away from beauty as one of the ways in which it communicates, in which it has a relationship with its members, it's diminished.
Yep. Yep. And this is, in one sense, we see this change in the arts. And by my experience, in general, a decline in the arts inside our churches in the late 60s and through the 70s and 80s. There was, but it wasn't only in the physical churches. There's also been, I sense, a decline in the quality of a lot of the church music. There's some wonderful church music still written, but there's, on the popular level, there wasn't as much beauty in the church music. And there's also a decline that you point out in that fine article in your book, that there's a decline in Catholic literature. There had been a lot of Catholic writers in the middle of the 20th century. And then with about the time of, in the early 60s, that comes to something of a halt. And it wasn't that they were just writing about Catholic stuff. They were writing about a wide variety of things, but they brought a Catholic perspective to the way they wrote. That was just really a wonderful, wonderful set of insights, including being kind of funnier and more raucous than a lot of other people.
Well, if you think about what is culture, culture is a conversation. It's a huge conversation of all of these different voices. They're telling stories, they're arguing, they're asking questions. Now, a really healthy conversation in a culture has all of the voices that exist in that culture somehow participating. If you went back to 1950 in the United States and you said, what's happening in literature? Give me your 20, 30 most important writers. Half of them would have been Catholic. You would have said, well, Flannery O'Connor, Robert Lowell, Walker Percy, J.F. Powers, Ernest Hemingway. These were people who were practicing Catholics. That doesn't even count the fallen Catholics. And it was, so the Catholic perspective was one of the voices that was heard in American culture. Now, if you ask, people about to list these important writers, it's almost an entirely secular list. Or if there's a Catholic on it, it probably is a Catholic that is very private about his or her faith.
Right.
Now, we are lucky to still have a number of significant Catholic writers, but I think they no longer, or at least until the last few years, didn't feel that they were part of any conversation. One of the things that I did was about 5, 6 years ago, I created a national conference for Catholic writers at the University of Southern California. And I brought people from all over the country, and they were astonished to see how many of each other there were, that how many really well-known writers were practicing Catholics. And that very sense of community instantaneously strengthened their identity and strengthened their set of purpose. We had another session at Fordham, and then last fall we did it at Loyola Chicago. We're hoping to do another conference, as soon as the pandemic, eases. But all I did was something really obvious. I brought people together to share their stories, to share their identity, to converse. And we need to enlarge that conversation across all the arts, across all the countries, and we have to bring the Catholic perspective back into public life. We have to bring, uh, Catholic experience back into public life.
One of the Jesuits that I taught with at Loyola University in the 80s and 90s did a series of courses on literature in film. And this Father Gene Phillips, who did this course on literature in film. And it was only after about 11, 12 years of doing this that he realized that almost all of the writers that had been put into film were Catholics. He wasn't trying to look out for Catholic writers in film. He just saw that Flannery O'Connor, Ernest Hemingway, and a variety of others, and even as a producer, someone like Alfred Hitchcock, who, and he did a lot of work with his films as well. Hitchcock, who had gone to the Jesuit schools in England and even said that he acquired his sense of the macabre from the Jesuits. But at any rate, he saw this and he was perplexed himself that he wasn't trying to figure it. Joseph Conrad, another one, raised Catholic. But he said this, and I said, well, it would seem obvious to me as someone who's not, a writer, but the obvious sense would be that Catholics have such a strong sense of the goodness of creation and of the meaning of sacrament as outward signs instituted by Christ to communicate grace. And that sacramental sense, that love of creation, made for concrete imagery that could be put into film more easily than some writers who are more vague and abstract.
Yeah, and Catholics also recognize the power of evil.
Yes.
And they understand that human life is a kind of drama, moving, one hopes, towards redemption, towards salvation, but also with the risk of perdition. So there's something essentially dramatic about the Catholic worldview, which
Yes.
is very different than I think a Protestant one, where you're saved or you're not at some moment, and everything else is foreordained. So you look at Graham Greene, Brian Moore, who wrote screenplays for Hitchcock. These are people, who had this sense of human life as this sacramental drama about salvation or perdition.
Yeah. And Catholics, right, I think of Flannery O'Connor's short stories as, dealing with these odd twists as good and evil come into play, and that this becomes a very important meeting place to understand the struggle of life. But at the same time, and this has been a theory of mine for a long time, is that belief in God is necessary to have a good sense of humor and to see the funny in life, because God gives you perspective on yourself. I think that's why we had, back in when we were young, there were so many Jewish comedians. Their background in faith helped them to see the irony of life and the humor of life. Whereas people who don't have faith are not able to see fun. I don't find atheists funny. They don't tell good jokes. Yep. I don't laugh at them. You might, rah, 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 yeah, I agree with you, but they're not funny. Bill Maher and others, they're not funny.
Let me approach your insight from the other end. I think one of the reasons that Catholic humor works is original sin.
Yeah.
You know, Catholics recognize human nature is fallen,
Yep.
even though it's supposed to be, you know, little less than the angels. And so it's the gap between what humanity should be and what humanity really is that's the basis of Catholic humor. I think, and so it's the hypocrisy, it's the irony,
Yep.
of all human existence, and it's an infinite subject because it never goes away. But it is really remarkable if you look at the American arts that there have been more significant major figures, at least in the last 50 years, in cinema than there has been as literature is sort of withdrawn.
Yeah.
And so, but the fact is that we need all of the arts because each of the arts reflects some different part of our experience. I mean, a painter, speaks to our visual sense. Music speaks not just to our aural sense, but also there's a kind of logic of music. So music has a kind of abstract quality that's very invigorating. And so, what art does, forget about art and faith. What art does is it speaks to one or more of our senses at usually the highest rate of being able to assimilate it. So it's almost always exhilarating because poetry gives you words at a much richer pace than conversation does. A painting does it visually, music does it orally, and this, in a sense, enlivens, expands, and develops our human capacity to deal with the world, which is largely experiential. That's what beauty does, in a sense, is to make us alert to our own physical existence and creation. And when we lose the arts, or when the arts, and this is what's happening, I think, in the United States, become kind of, you could say debased, but might be better to say sort of, limited into being commercial entities that are designed to sell a prefabricated experience. And so we have, in a sense, art has gone, in a sense, from something that celebrates existence into something that is, basically you can get, on Netflix for $9.95.
Yeah.
And so now, see, one of the good things about poetry, and people don't understand poetry. I know that you don't, you claim not to understand poetry, and I'll argue with you about that later. But one of the good things about poetry is a weird thing is that poetry is outside the marketplace. Nobody's getting rich writing poetry.
Yeah.
At least, and so it makes the art, at least at its highest range, a little purer because you're doing it for the sheer joy and enlightenment of doing it or trying to do it well. And in a culture in which everything else is for sale.
Yeah. God.
Well, think about the church. The church, at least in theory, should not be for sale. The church, has a kind of gratuitous existence. It is there for its own sake, without, you don't have to pay to go to mass. You don't have to pay for the sacraments. They are there for all of humanity to participate in.
Yep. Look, we have to take a break, Dana, but we'll be back in a couple of minutes, and we'll even show a clip of you reading one of your own poems. So if you all would stay with us, we'll come back to this important discussion. Welcome back, and we're speaking with Dana Gioia. He was the Poet Laureate of California and also the chair of the National Endowment for the Arts. And this is, we started to talk about the importance of poetry. And I'd mentioned to you in our conversation yesterday that I, had a lot of difficulty understanding poetry when I was in high school in particular. And one of the reasons I became aware of only after I entered the Society of Jesus is that I did not know enough English vocabulary to really understand poetry. And since then, in the Jesuits, I improved on that. But one of the things that we ought to understand is, what is it that makes something poetry rather than prose? What would be the distinction, and why is it important to have poetry?
Well, I think that's a good question, because in our society, a lot of things that people publish as poems, I don't think really are poems.
Yeah.
I think they're just writing. And when most people tell me I don't like poetry, what they're actually telling me, and I think what you are actually telling me, you're unintentionally misleading me, that what you're really saying is that you don't like most of the things that you see as poems. That when somebody gives you a poem, and it's not that you don't understand it, it's that you don't understand why you should like it. You don't feel any response to it. But what a poem is, poetry is the most ancient art that's practiced by humanity. And it goes back to before people had writing, before people had almost anything else except their body, and they made an art out of their body. And it's what we now think of as three different arts: song, poetry, and dance. They would move around, and they would chant, and they would sing, and they would basically, was mostly religious originally. It was a kind of ritual way of speaking. And if you take an oral culture, everybody's talking all the time in the way we still talk all the time. But when a poem begins because it sounded different. So what a poem is a spell. So when I was a little kid, my mother, who was a Mexican-American woman of no great education, had to memorize poems in grammar school. And we would be talking and everything, and suddenly she would say, "It was many and many a year ago, in a kingdom by the sea, that a maiden there lived whom you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And that maiden, she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. I was a child, and she was a child in that kingdom by the sea, and we loved with a love that was more than a love, I and my Annabel Lee." Now, you know exactly, without me telling you, the moment that poem began and the moment I stopped reciting it. Why? Because it sounded different.
Right.
And so what a poem does is, a poem is a song. It creates a spell of attention. Now, if you go into Latin, what's the word for poem? Carmen. Carmen means poem. It means a prophecy. It means a magical spell. And so a poem, creates a kind of spell. And so we know what a real poem is, the same way that we know what a song is. We don't think our way through it. We just feel that we're hearing language differently. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're a Christian, I hate to tell you this, Father Mitch, but you have to poetry, because 1/3 of the Bible is written as poetry.
I know.
Mary is told by the angel Gabriel that she is to bear the Savior of the world. She responds in a poem, "My soul doth magnify the Lord, and my spirit rejoiceth in God my Savior." She gives a poem. When Christ is preaching to the multitude and wants to talk about who is blessed, he gives a poem, the Beatitudes. And you see this again and again, that the prophecies are in poetry. So why did God, I guess God didn't know how to tell a story, because, God is speaking to humanity in poetry. And it's because poetry is the most memorable, concise, and moving way that we have to use words to express our experience. And there are times when everyday language is just not enough. We need a greater language. That's why the liturgy exists.
That's right.
The liturgy, which is largely poetic, it exists because we need language large enough to encompass our spiritual experiences.
Well, you know, I'm well aware of the poetic nature of the scriptures because I had to translate those passages. And one of the coolest things that happened to me, he's dead now, so I can say this, when I was getting my Hebrew qualifying exams, they gave me a poem, one of the Psalms, and I knew it by heart. I'd memorized it because it was in the Liturgy of the Hours. I used to pray my Liturgy of the Hours in Hebrew, so I knew that psalm by heart. And it was easier to memorize psalms than it was passages of narrative. So that it speaks to that quality of what a French philosopher, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, had said, that language is a way of singing reality. And that's a nice way to put it, and poetry in particular does that.
Well, if you think of it, there's two kinds of speech. There's speech, and then there's speech raised to the level of song.
Yes.
And that's poetry. Monastic life is based on the recitation of divine poems.
Yes.
Because it's the exaltation. But yeah, it's, Robert Frost said, poetry is a way of remembering what it would impoverish us to forget.
Right.
A way of remembering what it would impoverish us to forget. You could say the same thing for the liturgy, for the Psalms, for all the sacred poems.
Yes, this is a very important part, and to be able to put into music as well, not only the poem with the meaningfulness of the words, but also when it's set to music, poems set to music like Nessun Dorma in opera and a variety of others, they become so powerful. And again, we've seen an impoverishment of our music and Catholic poetry in the liturgy. And we very much need to have that sense. I'd like to go to that clip of the poem that you wrote, where you are reciting the poem.
Yes.
It's a poem about the death of an infant son, and you called it Prayer. So let me switch over to that.
Okay, good.
My first son died in infancy. This is one of the poems that I wrote in his memory. It's called Prayer. Echo of the clock tower, footstep in the alleyway, sweep of the wind sifting the leaves. Jeweler of the spider web, connoisseur of autumn's opulence, blade of lightning harvesting the sky, keeper of the small gate, choreographer of entrances and exits, midnight whisper traveling the wires, seducer, healer, deity, or thief, I will see you soon enough, in the shadow of the rainfall, in the brief violet darkening a sunset. But until then, I pray watch over him, as the mountain guards its covert oar, and the harsh falcon its flightless young.
One of the qualities of that poem, like to me any good poem, is that there is very concrete imagery that is evoked. You're not telling a story about a mountain protecting the ore within. You evoke this strong image and help us to think about God's protection of something precious, such as your infant son. And that concrete imagery is so essential to good poems.
Well, I think that it's also, though, it's the imagery set to a kind of musical phrasing. And, that poem's been set to music a number of times, most famously by the composer Morten Lauridsen. And it's actually now something that's often, his beautiful, beautiful choral arrangement is often performed at memorial services. And I mean, one does not write for that sort of thing, but if you actually write a poem, because this is a poem of consolation, of commemoration. When people lose a child, they not only need consolation, they want to remember and commemorate the existence of that child whose life has been cut short. In our case, we lost our first child, our first son, at 4 months of sudden infant death syndrome. And so, that poem also is a great a vehicle for the magnitude of the emotion we had.
Sure. And this is another element of poetry, that it can evoke that strong interior feeling, but even more deeply than feelings, brings out something of the spiritual. And this is where poetry inside the church, as you mentioned earlier, St. Thomas Aquinas, the greatest theologian in the history of the church. And he wrote poems that you know better, and I know better today. I can cite his poetry on the Holy Eucharist, the Tantum Ergo, for instance, more easily than I can cite the passages that he wrote on the theology of the Eucharist. And we've been singing those for the last 800 years now.
Because a poem is language which asks to be memorized. Now, if it's no good, when it asks, you say no. But the great poems are things which essentially stick in our memory.
Yes.
And if you think about the Catholic liturgy, and this was something that actually was discarded for 30 or 40 years, but it's, at least in my parish, it's been reinstated. On the great feast days, we recite a poem, a sequence.
Right.
The Stabat Mater, the Veni, Creator Spiritu. We recite these great medieval sequences, these rhymed poems, a couple of which are written, by Aquinas, as expressions of of the magnitude of our experience, which is interesting. I get phone calls or emails quite often from strangers asking me to recommend poems. What occasions do you think they ask me for?
I imagine weddings or funerals.
Exactly. Because for weddings and for funerals, they have more emotions that ordinary language can handle. And they need a poem as a kind of vehicle just to be able to do this. Right. And so if you think about that, a vehicle takes you where you need to go. Right. When the church says, okay, we don't need that vehicle anymore, we have small emotions, we have small prosaic insights about our faith, there's something wrong with the liturgy. And I think that in the 60s and 70s, they said, let's just make it every day, let's make it casual, let's make it contemporary. And we lost the ability to represent the full mystery of Catholicism.
I was going to say that back in the 60s, there was such a focus on trying to be relevant that it became superficial.
Yeah. Superficial and also ephemeral. Yeah. I mean, they would do something that was of the moment, and 6 months later it was stale. Yeah. And so one of the tests of great art is, does it last? Does it endure? Does it renew itself? And so, and that's what what I think we've lost in some ways is that if you think about what it means to be Catholic, what it means to be Catholic is to participate in a mystery of redemption that goes from, in my case, Santa Rosa, California in 2020, back to Jerusalem at the Last Supper and the crucifixion. It is an unbroken continuity. And if we lose any step of that, we've lost something important. And so, what the church has always done is to maintain. I mean, it's interesting. In the Mass, we still have a little fragment of Greek to remember that. We have the Latin. We have all of these things. And what happened is we tried to discard that past. Right now in the United States, they're trying to discard the past.
Yep.
Let's just have a set of very comfortable, contemporary things. Where I think that poetry and art, one of its great powers is that it remembers. It remembers the fullness and complexity of human experience, and it consoles us through beauty.
And I would suggest that a lot of the times people are trying to get us to forget the past because they are scoundrels who want to mess with our future and our present. So that's why we should not forget it. I just want to let people know that your book is called The Catholic Writer Today,
Yes.
and Other Essays. It's by Dana Gioia. You can get it at EWTN Religious Catalog. That's EWTNRC.com. It is item 4403. And if you want to learn more about Dana Gioia's work, you can go to danagioia.com, and it's DANAGIOIA. Italians have so many vowels. We Polish don't do that.
I know. It's an impossible name. It's a beautiful name. It means joy. But
Yes.
let me say something about
I'm afraid that we're flat out of time.
Okay.
So we have to say thank you to you and farewell. And may the Lord bless you and all of our viewers with a love of God's beauty and richness. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And do keep us in between your gas bill, electric bill, and cable bill, and we'll keep paying our bills to do these shows. Thank you. God bless.